Guys, do you know what this episode is? This episode is my 20th supplemental episode. That is so many. It's so much. Oh my god. Thank you to everyone who has been hanging out for this because it's just getting weirder. 20 feels like so many, plus 7 episodes of the actual challenge. I can't believe it. I'm just stunned, honestly, and in a way I'm really glad that I made the decision to track every single book I was reading in this vein, because someday I'm gonna look back on this and go, wow, you were nuts. So I have 5 more books to talk about today, and 2 of them are actually related because they are new-ish books on Abraham Lincoln, and then we've just got some history about the post-Cold War stalemate, and then some conspiracies and polarization. So it's a mixed bag of history and political science, and I'm just going to tell you about them in the order that I wrote them. I feel like I need to apologize to Not 1 Inch: America, Russia, and the Making of the Post-Cold War Stalemate by Mary Elise Surratt. When I read this book, I had no attention span. I don't know what was going on in my head, but I struggled. I struggled to listen to this. I struggled to take in the information. It was like something was going on in the back, and it was like, nah, 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 and I was not hearing it. Now, normally I would say, well, maybe it's because the book wasn't written well, but when the book started, I was really into it. So Surratt, who wrote this book, got access for the first time to some files that had previously not been accessed by writers or other people, particularly from the Bill Clinton Presidential Library. For whatever reason, the Clinton Library just doesn't like to share, I guess. But Mary got into the library, and, because Clinton talked a lot with Boris Yeltsin and then was there for the transition to Vladimir Putin. Now, this book was published just shortly before the beginning of the Russian-Ukraine war, but I feel like if you are someone trying to understand how we got to that moment, this is a really, really great book, using the historical view of, what George H.W. did and what Clinton did, and all the way forward in our relations with Russia, and how Ukraine has always been a part of that right from the beginning. And I think maybe if you don't pay much attention to international politics, like, it's not really my ball of wax, but it really is amazing to see how prominent Ukraine has always been in this problem, and to see the evolution of basically how we get to war. So I'm really sorry to this book that I didn't pay attention to it that much. I feel like I did it a disservice, and therefore I didn't review it or rate it very well. But if you are interested in this topic and getting this new information, or newish information now, this might be something you really want to check out, and don't let me tell you otherwise. So I then went on to read Republic of Lies: American Conspiracy Theorists and the Surprising Rise to Power by Anna Merlan. I didn't really know what to think going into this book. It seemed like a quick read, it seemed like an interesting read, and I needed a break from like the denser history that I was working on. And so if you are interested in a brief overview of the rise of many different kinds of conspiracy groups in America, this is a book that takes a chapter and focuses on these different communities and how they have evolved over the years. Anna Merlan has been working the quote-unquote conspiracy beat for her magazine for quite some time. And what's really awesome about that is that instead of just like in the 1990s, blah, 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 she has relationships with many of these people. She has a really awesome connection to people who exist within these communities. And therefore, it's a way more personal and inviting book, seeing these not as like, movements, faceless movements, but inhabited by people and why they may believe what they believe. I did have a couple of issues with it. One was that the ending was not good. The ending went from this book that was chapters on individual groups and then members within those groups to like a ending that made like these broad claims about just generalities, and I was like, no, that's not working for me. And secondly, I believe her intention is to debunk some, if not most, or all of these conspiracy groups and why it's like kind of crazy that people believe these things. But what she does very intentionally is she says, okay, well, here are the reasons why people may believe these things, because at some point it was proven historically true that X happened. So for example, with people of color being reticent to take the COVID vaccine, well, the Tuskegee experiment was a real thing where African Americans were experimented on. What that does, though, I think over the course of the chapters is that when she makes her eventual claim, like, you know, wow, people believe such wild theories that are proven not to be true, I'm like, I think all you've done is validate why some of these people believe these things. So it's interesting. It's an interesting view into this world, and definitely at the more personal level than I've seen other books maybe try to tackle this. But yeah, I'm not sure it in the end does what it claims it's trying to do. I then finally read Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. Now this book attempts to explain divisions in America, and you may have heard of it. It's been, I feel like, on every single book list, even tangentially related to it, for years. It's one of the books that Obama, for example, constantly has on his book lists every year, which I now realize is extra funny because Klein actually argues against some of Obama's beliefs and statements, and he's like, no, I don't think Obama was correct. So that was just funny to me. But I think the problem was that I, in a way, waited so long to read it, and so many other books on this topic have come out that I have read, that while I was reading it, I was like, yeah, I agree, okay, I see your argument, blah, blah. But I was like, I don't think you're telling me anything I necessarily don't already know. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad book. It just means that I think I missed the particular zeitgeist moment for the book, for someone like me who reads on polarization quite a bit. However, what I will say is that if you are not me and you're like, okay, I just want one book to kind of try to explain to me how we got here, I think Why We're Polarized is one of the best choices you could make for that, just in general terms. So I really enjoyed it. It was really well written. I have no issues with any of that. But I think that maybe I should have tried to read this a little bit earlier, and then I would have just been like a little bit more enthused by it than I ended up being. So as I mentioned in the beginning, my last two books are both new-ish releases about Abraham Lincoln, and they are wildly different. And they were really weird to read back to back, essentially. So first I have the new release from John Meacham, And Then There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle. Now, if you've been following these videos for any length of time, you know that I have a really weird relationship with John Meacham. I really, really like him as a writer, but sometimes there are just elements about his books that just, they rub me the wrong way for one reason or another. I've read a lot of his stuff at this point because he is one of the preeminent historians of our time, essentially. I think one of the things that this book suffers from is its presentation as a full biography of Abraham Lincoln. If that's what you're looking for, this is not it. It is not going to happen here. Lincoln's early life is focused on a bit. His time as a lawyer is blipped over like this. What this book really is a focus on is his philosophical and religious beliefs and how those influenced him as a person and his conduct during the Civil War. And the book itself seems to be in tension with that identity. Like I said, it has no problem really like scooting over a lot of Lincoln's early life. But then there is also a lot of discussion on how, for Abraham Lincoln's inauguration, the Electoral College actually really came into play. And so there's a lot of allusions between how people were trying to keep Lincoln from taking the presidency in the same way as January 6th kind of unfolded, although not quite as like number of people storming the Capitol, etc. But there was a similar plot. So it focuses a lot on that, like I would expect like a history book to be. But then there are long passages where it's more philosophical, more about religious belief, more about how that informed, you know, Lincoln's sense of morality and how he felt about the Civil War. And I just don't know necessarily if even the book knew what it wanted to be. But because of that, again, if you're looking for a like standard biography of Abraham Lincoln, you're not going to get that here. What you will get is, I mean, Meacham is a great writer. He writes very well. It's very, I don't want to say lyrical, but he has a way of his writing where it's just incredibly easy to read or listen to. And maybe this is the kind of book, maybe you've already read your biography on Lincoln, as I have several, and you're looking for a different angle on Lincoln that you've never really seen before, because I can't say that I have seen a book consistently take this angle and learning some of this information that was new to me. But yeah, this book is having an identity crisis, and it does impact the reading experience. So I do recommend this book if you're interested, but just, you know, approach it knowing it for what it is and not expecting it to be something it isn't. And finally, I read The Lincoln Conspiracy, The Secret Plot to Kill America's 16th President and Why It Failed by Brad Meltzer and John Mensch. So this is part of a conspiracy series, and it's the second book. And they also wrote one about a secret conspiracy to kill George Washington, which I reviewed in a very early supplemental. I adore this series for the fact that it is the soapiest nonfiction I think I have ever read. Because, like, you know that George Washington, for example, is not murdered during the Revolutionary War. And you know that Abraham Lincoln is murdered, but he's murdered later. Events mostly take place prior to his presidency, while he's like trying to get to DC. And so like, you know, intellectually that Lincoln is gonna survive this adventure that the book is telling you about. And the conspiracy to try to kill Lincoln before he was took the presidential oath of office is way more involved. There's the whole Pinkerton detective agency. There's like a conspiracy. There's multiple people undercover. It's a wild time that we never hear about really, because A, it fails, and B, the Civil War happens, he gets assassinated, and so there are just so many other things in Lincoln's life to focus on. And genuinely, these books are written in such a way that while you're listening to it, you're like, oh my goodness, is Lincoln going to die here? Is he going to be harmed here? Are they going to get him? And then you have to be like, well, obviously they're not. But they're just these books, they're nonfiction. They're nonfiction, but they're written like fiction, and they're just soapy and dramatic as heck, and I love them. They're like a nonfiction guilty pleasure for me, and if that is something that you want to take some time with, I recommend them, because they, so far in both of these books, have illuminated smaller instances in history that major stories wouldn't focus on, because again, they're often focused on plots that fail, and therefore why would you spend a lot of time with them in a bigger history, right? But they're so interesting, and they do inform the history of the people in them and just kind of show you like a micro moment that is just like watching a soap opera. So those are my 5 books for my 20th supplemental episode. Thank you guys so much for watching this one video. If you've watched other supplemental videos, if you've watched other episodes, this has just been such a wild and crazy journey, and I can't believe that we have reached 20 supplemental videos. I know, again, it's more than 20. We're actually getting closer to 30 videos now, but it just feels really crazy. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity and for the people who sit around and listen to me talk about my nonfiction history obsession. I appreciate you, and I'm grateful. And I'm gonna go see if I have a new audiobook in from the library. Start this process all over again. Thanks, guys. Bye.